Hello everyone, welcome to Mystery School. So I know I said last video I was going to discuss the black pill, but it might take some more time than I thought it was going to take. So I figured I'd discuss a topic that I kind of thought about a lot, and I hope I got all my thoughts onto this PowerPoint well enough to get people to understand the perspective, or rather the idea of the is-ought gap. So, what is an is? You know, An is sometimes an objective fact. So, for example, let's say theoretically there's a person named Josh and he gets into a car accident today. It's almost indisputable, but you would see the car is jacked up, Josh is in the hospital, and he got into a car accident today. Mystery School is run by a black man. This is an objective fact. I hope I'm black. I look black. I think I'm black. I'm black. The earth revolves around the sun. This is should be an objective fact for anybody watching this video. I hope so. So everything is up for debate, including objective facts. So, what leads to debate? Well, different perspectives lead to debate, and relativity leads to debate too. So, you know, one example of like relativity and perspective coming into a debate on objective facts would be, time, a dilation is an example of like where relativity comes into effect of an objective fact. So, from his perspective, if he's going at the speed of light, it might only be a few minutes have passed. But from your perspective, due to relativity, it's been thousands of years when he arrived back on Earth. This is an example of how perspective and relativity can take two people who had different perspectives and they come to a debate table and say, "Hey, wait a second, who's correct? For me, it's been 3 minutes. For you, it's been thousands of years. Who's correct?" Okay, and if we don't or can't agree on what is, then we cannot get to an ought together. So what do I mean by together? Well, normally, so I'll use a racially charged example here, but when we take a look at black people in America, you know, if we don't agree that black people are even people, which would be the is, then we can't get to the ought. So this caused the Civil War, or at least Civil War, I guess, more based off of like states' rights or something like that. But this does cause things like bigotry and racism. If we can't agree that black people are actually human beings, then we cannot get to an ought together. So you're going to have division there, division between people. I think they're people, they're not people. Okay, well then who's correct? One of those positions is objective fact, but we're going to get to a phrase I'm going to use a lot in the next slide. So let's get to the next slide next. So objective fact versus is. They are not always the same. Keep that in mind. They are not always the same. All objective facts are ises, but not all ises are objective facts. So the example I use here is the Earth revolving around the sun is an objective fact. But for centuries, we behaved as if the sun revolved around the Earth. So the sun revolving around the Earth was an is until we acquired the knowledge of heliocentrism, which was done by Copernicus, in case you didn't know that. So objective facts often conflict with the is due to a lack of information. This leads to both good and bad outcomes. I don't like using the word good and bad, but it's kind of like a moralistic language. So it just leads to, if you want to take the moralistic language out of it, it just leads to an action that human beings would then judge to be good or bad. So an is can be true or false. So, we'll use the old-fashioned one here of women make 77 cents on the dollar. Shit, I have a one too many a zero there. Fuck, they're making way less money now. Women make 77 cents on the dollar compared to men. And so let's talk about this one here. How can an is be true or false? Well, it makes sense if you think about it. An objective fact It's just that. It's objectively true. It's objectively true that the Earth revolves around the sun. But that doesn't matter. The objective fact doesn't matter. It does, but it doesn't. For all intents and purposes, which I have down here, it doesn't matter what actually is objectively true. All that matters is, for all intents and purposes, what are we going to do with this information? You know, for all intents and purposes, probably it's how the world operates. So for this 77 cents figure here, I remember watching the a Democratic debate. It was one of the ones that happened like months ago now, where Kamala Harris sat on stage and said that it's a shame that women make 77 cents on the dollar compared to men for the same job. Okay, first things first. I'm God, I hate sitting here debunking the wage gap because it's been done a million times on YouTube. But if you actually now the stat itself is true. The stat itself is true. If you look at the I think it was the Bureau of Labor Stats had this stat, and all they did was they took the wages of men and the wages of women, divided them together, and crafted a number, which comes out to be this number here. This number is true, but it doesn't tell you why. And the number, I don't believe the study ever actually professed that it was for the same work. It never actually professed that. But the politicians took this number and they ran away with it. So they took this number, and all of a sudden we started off with this 77 cents number, and all of a sudden it became for the same work. No, that's not what the study actually says. The number is correct, and there's nothing really wrong with the study, but the people using this information are taking it and they're running with it. So as I said earlier, this is when a politician uses a number or uses is trying to create an is that is false and using it for all intents and purposes. But remember, it can be true or false. So, when we talk about, let's go back up top here. So, when we talk about both good and bad outcomes, what was the good outcome of human beings thinking that the Earth revolves around the sun, or the other way around, the sun revolves around the Earth? The good outcome is that it gave people an answer that was wrong, but it gave people an answer. And even if people like having answers because the unknown is really scary. So it gave people an answer for the time being that they could live with, even if it was fucking wrong. It didn't matter that it was wrong. It gave people peace of mind, and didn't have to worry about it anymore. The bad outcome that came out of that idea, though, was that the church got a hold of it and they started killing people who rejected that doctrine for years. Also, if we functioned off of that now, we probably would have never made it to space. And it also, it requires more calculations to understand the solar system versus the model that we have now that actually works. So it's objectively worse in almost every single way that we had an objective fact that was not actually an is, that for all intents and purposes, the objective fact didn't matter, that we just ran with something else that was absolute bullshit. So our next thing should be, what is an ought? So, an ought is a response to an is. And it can be anything. Anything, but some responses are more probable than others. Probability comes into play here. The probability of us, now anything's possible, but some are more probable. Never forget that. Who would have ever thought that we would have had a group of people who would have been considered less than human? But in reality, though, if you look at human history, it really isn't that far off, really, the mark. It happened all the time. So it leads to, okay, so let's talk about this 77 cents on the dollar figure for the same job. It's wrong, but for all intents and purposes, at least what these politicians are trying to do, it's true. For all intents and purposes, when you're walking around society and you say that this 77 cents figure is wrong, people are going to call you a liar. They're going to say, no, you're the liar. You're not objectively right here, dude. The stat's been said a million times now, and for all intents and purposes, this stat is true. So, what does society do next? What should society ought do now that it has accepted the wrong fact that the 77 cents figure for the same job figure is correct? So, let's take an example of an accountant. You have two people with the job title of accountant, but one puts in more hours than the other one. So the other person does the bare minimum 40 hours a week. The other person's working 60. Society would ask the question, well, who should get paid more? Now, the idiots in the audience might say, well, they have the same job title, so they should get paid the same. Anybody that runs a business knows that, okay, well, you have some employees that stay on long term, they stay longer and they do more work, and they have different job responsibilities. One accountant could just be doing basic bitch work, and the other one could be doing higher end work to work his way up the ladder. Like, who knows what these two people are doing? So if you were to just run with this example here, we could run into a situation where, we already have a law against paying people, differently via sex, you know, Fair Pay Act of whatever year the hell it was, and this has actually been tried in a bunch of other, I think it's Iceland is a good example of this, where Iceland actually has like 5 or 6 laws on the books that are supposed to address this issue, but it's still not solved yet because the issue was something else. But because they've accepted a wrong premise, their conclusion is going to be something illogical. It's not going to make any sense. They're not going to be able to ever solve the problem. So, we're running into, let's go back to the accountant example here real quick though. So we have two people now, and let's say society goes with a bonehead answer of, well, two people with the same job title should get exactly the same pay no matter what. Okay, so, we have Bob and Susie here, and what's Bob's next logical response going to be? So Bob, the is in Bob's life now is that, oh, so they're going to start paying me and Susie. Susie works less than I do, and she's getting paid the same as I am. Why the hell would I work more than Susie is for the same amount of money? Like, this is something that I would do. If they passed a law saying that me and somebody else at my job and I work, 60 hours a week and they only work 40, I'm going to lower my production down to their level because it's very obvious that this job is not worth this much money, or rather, the job is not worth this much output. If society's saying that, hey, working 40 hours a week is good enough for $120,000 a year, well, why the fuck would I work more? So what you're going to see is a drop in output. And then what's that going to lead to? Well, maybe less productive workers, less output, but it could lead to positive things too. People might have more time outside of work. There's a whole bunch of things that can come out of an is, to an ought. There's a whole bunch of things that can come out of this scenario. Like the possibilities are endless. It could lead to more people being out of work. A little less hours worked, less stress, all this stuff that could lead to maybe better outcomes in other areas. And all this stuff can come out of an is that is false, and an ought, that came out of a false is. So, you know, this is going to be a weird concept here. So this next line here, but is leads to ought, which leads to is, which leads to ought. So if you listen to my example earlier, I was talking about Bob, and I asked, okay, well, so let's start from the very beginning. The is that 77 cents on the dollar for every single job is true, even though it's false, but it's true now. So this is true for all intents and purposes. Okay, and this leads to society passing, we have a discussion, and we get to our ought. So what we ought do is that we should equalize the pay for men and women no matter what. So everybody who has the title of accountant gets paid exactly the same. Okay, so here we are now. So accountants get paid 120K a year no matter what. Okay, so now this becomes Bob's is. So Bob's is now is that, okay, accountants get paid 120K a year no matter what. Okay, well, Bob's ought Bob has a couple options now. Bob can get angry and say, you know what, it's bullshit that she gets paid the same amount I do. I'm going to quit and find somewhere else to work at. Or Bob can just play the game too and say, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to lower my the amount of hours I'm going to work down to 40, because if she gets paid the same, because they can't discriminate against me too, because they can't discriminate me based on sex. So here I am now, I'm going to drop my hours down. And here we are. And then what does that lead to? So that's an is now. That leads to an ought, which leads to an is, which leads to an ought. It goes on forever. Every ought is an is, and every is an ought at the same time. They act together and individually simultaneously. So they are inseparable but independent. If you need me to explain that, maybe send me a comment or something like that in the comment section. I hope that makes sense from the example I gave with Bob and Susie with the accountant example, that an is leads to an ought, which leads to an is. But an is can be an ought. An is leads to an ought, but they're both exactly the same. So false is leads to an ought that can either be true or false. Analyze both sides of the equation independently. I'm not really sure if I agree with this myself, actually. I'm trying to I kind of want to have a discussion with somebody about this thing, but nobody seems to give a shit. So, false is still leads to an ought that can either be true or false. Analyze both sides of the equation independently. I agree with the second half of that. You need to analyze the is and the ought independently of one another. But, can a false is lead to an ought that is true? I guess so. So a false is could either lead to a false ought or a true ought. Or you could just say a false is, or an is this leads to an ought, and whether or not it's true or false or not is almost irrelevant. So this is what I call, this is like the circle of is and ought. Is leads to ought, which leads to is, which leads to ought, which leads to is. This is what I described or tried to describe earlier in that first the word thing I said here about the every is an ought and every ought, ought and is an ought. Is leads to ought, which leads to is. So this is what I was trying to describe here. I kind of just drew a diagram or a circle here showing that is ought is ought. It goes on forever. Like it doesn't stop. Like it is leads to an ought, leads to an is, leads to an ought. It goes on forever. You could think of this like almost like space-time. If you know anything about like physics, the space-time continuum is a thing that exists. And the space-time continuum is that space and time are actually one thing, but they sort of act independently too. And if you think of it like fusion, I'm going to bring up a Dragon Ball Z example here, but so like when Goten and Trunks create Gotenks, Goten and Trunks still exist independently, but come together to form something greater. So time exists independently of space, and space exists independently of time, but fused together, with space-time, which is how we get here. So how now that you have this information, how do you use it? Or is everything I'm saying bullshit? And I could be wrong too. I've run off the mantra that no information is better than bad information. So if my information is wrong, hey, hit me up in the comment section and say you're a fucking idiot, and we'll figure it out from there. So now you're already using it, but using a tool and knowing how it works are two different things. You should be able to better analyze the world and people. If you know someone well enough, you can predict their next move. This sounds like some like next level shit, but it's really not. Your mind's already doing this automatically, but you just don't know about it. It's like in your subconscious mind, kind of like sitting there. You're constantly trying to predict people's moves, and the reason why like you get this like thing in your mind is like, what happened what happened with that? Like because something unpredictable happened. Your mind's constantly making predictions about what's going to happen next. And when something unexpected happens, you're like, oh, that's when your mind snaps into action and try to figure out what to do next. So prediction requires knowledge of enough variables to be accurate. So it's almost like you're looking through your rear view mirror and you see the dude behind you. He's going really fast and you see him on his cell phone. He's looking down and you're like, shit, he might hit me. So what are you gonna do? Well, you have a couple of options. You can either tense your back up and just get ready to get hit, and you get slammed and be ready to fucking control your car. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do in that situation. You can honk your horn to get to do the tension. You could you could yell at your car. You could move your car out of the way and just say screw it. I'm gonna let the dude ahead of me get hit, and fuck it, let it be what it is. Prediction requires knowledge of enough variables though. So if you have enough variables, if you know where you are in your car in your lane and you see, okay, well, I can merge over left and nobody gets hit. Well, fuck it, I'm gonna merge over left and get out of his way. He's not paying attention. Also lets you construct better arguments and thought experiments. Being able to know, an is and an ought, what is and what we ought do. If you have the variables and the information, the knowledge, you should be able to apply that to your arguments and get better outcomes when you're talking to people. and thought experiments. These are just basically like, what I did earlier with Bob and Susie and shit like that. Just thinking about a scenario, thinking it through your head, and trying to like figure out, okay, so how exactly does this work? How do we get from a pay gap, which is false, fine, but we get from a pay gap that we think exists to this outcome? How does this like what's the likelihood of X, Y, and Z happening? So, the way I view it is that you can never know it all, but you can never know enough either. Like you should always be looking for new information and trying to figure out the world and trying to get a better grasp on how reality and how people work in order for you to function in this hellhole. So this has been Mystery School. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions or want to discuss the topic. I'm always around. I do work a job though, so don't hit me up. But you know, other than that, this is Mystery School.